Hey everyone, the Atlanta Federal Reserve Bank just released their modeled GDP forecast for the first quarter, and it was a bit of a shocker. Based on their model, they predict that economic growth in the first quarter of this year will be negative 1.5%. Now, as you might guess, the report set off alarm bells, and the natural next question was whether we're going into a recession. Now, the release came on the heels of some other data that some find concerning. Consumer sentiment dropped dramatically in February, tumbling from a reading of 71.1 down to a reading of 64.7, its lowest level since November 2023. In addition, the consumption reading came in showing a 0.5% decline. That's a whole bunch of bad economic news on the surface. You see, each of those readings also has a story to tell that takes some of the heat off the data points. When you do a deeper dive into the consumer sentiment data, there's a clear political bias to the results. Part of the sentiment survey asks whether you think the government is doing a good job, and that's one of the metrics that fell. Digging deeper, the percentage of Democrats who think the government was doing a good job fell 30 percentage points. Meanwhile, the opinion of independents barely moved, and the opinion of Republicans who think the government is doing a good job increased by 24%. So as the impact of the new administration was being felt, sentiment shifted pretty much based on party lines. That means you have to take the consumer sentiment reading with a grain of salt. Will it affect rental housing demand? Maybe a bit. Could it affect spending behavior? Yeah, probably. But when you consider that the politics in our country are split pretty evenly, the net impact will probably be close to neutral. Half the people are less happy and half the people are more happy. Now, as for the consumption reading, there's a lot of uncertainty. In fact, the uncertainty index, which I talk about a lot these days, shot up to its highest level since the pandemic. There are a lot of things baked into that, including the announcement about the negative economic growth in the first quarter by the Federal Reserve. But on top of that, we're also contending with prospective government downsizing, which is contentious, and the issue of deportation, which is still raising uncertainty, and you also have the potential impact of tariffs. Within that context, people are spending a little less and saving a little bit more. In December, the savings rate was 3.5%, and in January, it increased to 4.6%. But part of that is also tied to the severe weather that impacted a large portion of the country over the last couple months. And finally, regarding the prospective negative quarter of GDP, there's a story there too. Basically, if you're a company that relies on imports, whether those are consumer goods for a retailer or parts for a manufacturing company, you have to take the risk of tariffs very seriously. If you're a retailer and the price of a product you sell is effectively going to jump by 25% because of tariffs, the natural thing to do is to buy as much of those products as you possibly can and get them shipped into the United States before the tariffs hit. And that's what happened. Basically, manufacturers and retailers and other businesses are front-running their imports before potential tariffs are put in place. Businesses are stocking up on stuff. And net exports, which is the total amount of exports from the United States minus imports, is a component of GDP. And that figure looks like it's going to run pretty negative for the first quarter. All of that makes sense. Now think about this for a minute. If a business went out in the first quarter and bought as many supplies as they could before the tariffs are implemented, thereby boosting imports, what happens next quarter? They'll probably import less. And as a result, we won't have the negative net export imbalance in the second quarter weighing down GDP. So as a result, economic growth should move back into positive territory in the second quarter, potentially rebounding somewhere in the 4% range. And when you take a longer view, looking forward 5 to 7 years, The choppiness of this political and economic transition probably won't have much bearing on commercial real estate returns, which is why investors always need to keep their eyes on the horizon.